In a previous video, I converted this pile of steel tubing and 3D printed parts into a functional CNC router, appropriately called the MPCNC, or Mostly Printed CNC. Building this thing was a lot of fun, it was pretty inexpensive, and it has some good accuracy considering what it is. And I'm pretty happy with it as far as cutting wood goes, but the stock build of this thing is just not exciting enough on its own. I want more power, more control. I want it enclosed, I want linear rails, I want to get rid of this insane Z-backlash. No really, WTF. So in this video, I'm going to show you how I transformed this stock MPCNC into something much better, much more pleasant to use, and most importantly, reliably cuts aluminum. The MPCNC from V1 Engineering is a really unique do-it-yourself CNC router, because unlike most routers, which use linear rails and metal joints, this one extensively uses steel tubing, 608 bearings, and over 2 kilograms or 4.5 pounds of 3D printed parts. The purpose, of course, is that all this is inexpensive and readily available to most hobbyists. I was able to build that MPCNC for about $600. And it really works, at least as far as cutting wood goes. But cutting aluminum and other soft metals is a high priority for me, and this is where it started to fall short. And I do want to be clear, people do successfully cut aluminum on it, slowly, and I did that, but it wasn't pretty, it wasn't fast, and it really wasn't very fun. It also had some accuracy issues. And also my garage was covered in aluminum chips, so I spent a week designing a complete overhaul of this machine and a few more weeks putting it into action. It was a heck of an adventure, but I'm extremely pleased with the final result.
All right, here's the MPCNC. I don't know, a month later, I've done about a dozen cuts on it. I just started trying to cut aluminum. I was mostly successful. I've noticed a few problems with it. Started to add a cable chain, so that'll help with these wires that are kind of just hanging out there and getting dragged around in awkward ways. We got this makeshift enclosure. It's, it is what it is. It's just a bunch of random polycarbonate panels that I had left over from other projects. It's just temporary.
In terms of accuracy, I spent a good 10 minutes one day just manipulating the core and seeing how much and where all the play in the system is. And beyond this insane Z-backlash and the lead screw, which I'm going to get to later, the way the core interfaces with the cross tubes and the frame had some play I just couldn't get rid of. Everything I was supposed to adjust was already at its limits. But the good news is that the connection between the cross tubes and the outer frame seemed pretty solid. Each axis uses pretty weak motors, but it uses 2 of them, which helps with squaring and also doubles the available torque. I still won't be using them to make chips like this anytime soon, but I didn't feel like that part of the machine needed any improvements to reach my goals.
I'm going to go to Fab Lab and cut out a bunch of panels and a new baseboard. This is a 1/2-inch project board, which was really not ideal. I think I got some alignment issues from the way I did it. I'm just going to cut everything out on a large CNC machine, and everything should be more square, more rigid, and I'll have a really cool enclosure to go with it.
I'm going to use the remainder of this video to talk about the upgrades and the specific issues I ran into. I have a separate video showing the full upgrade time-lapse, which I thought was pretty neat. Might be worth watching before watching this or after. It also includes a pretty cool showcase of things that I've made with the upgraded CNC machine. So the stock MPCNC build uses these black clamps on the back of the core to allow the core to move in the X and Y axes along these steel tubes. But I was having problems with those clamps that I couldn't get them to hug the rail tightly enough, and everything I was supposed to tighten was already kind of maxed out. So I decided to take a blasphemous leap of faith and switch to using linear rails, which is a more common but more expensive motion system for really any kind of CNC machine. So I bought this absurdly cheap linear rail from the Chinese company Vivor, and I'm not kidding when I say absurd. This is 3 meters or 10 feet of solid steel industrial rail with 4 glide blocks for the base price of about $90, and I got an additional $25 off for buying it during the holiday season. For reference, if you wanted to get the same amount of genuine high-wind rails and blocks, you're looking at close to $400. If I was going to be running this rail at spec, which is like 2,000 pounds, then I probably wouldn't trust this. But for this janky little CNC machine, I think it'll do just fine. So I hopped into Fusion 360. I was able to import the STLs as meshes, but it was good enough to figure out how to design this adapter, both for attaching the rail to the core, as well as designing an adapter to fix the ends of the rail to the trucks that run along the side of the machine. And it worked surprisingly well, except when I printed it and went for a test fit. Although the model was technically a good fit, there was no way to physically get it onto the core without teleporting it, or at least flexing it in some way, which certainly wasn't going to happen with this carbon fiber ABS. I tried a hacky solution, which was literally taking a hacksaw to it, and while that technically would have worked, I found out during the test fit that I actually made the mounting holes the wrong size anyway, so I went ahead and I redesigned it as 2 smaller pieces, which worked out much better. But that's not the end of the story with the linear rails. If you watched my time-lapse build video, you'll see that when I was cutting the aluminum that I had a failed part over here on the right. When I was doing the contour of the XYZ plate, this particular failure happened twice, where the machine seemed to have a kind of seizure when it was deep between 2 walls of the contour operation. Luckily, I got this whole thing on camera, so I was able to analyze the footage to assess where the actual problem was that was causing this to happen. The problem is not between the router and the core, it's actually the whole core that is deflecting with respect to the workpiece. It must be some kind of resonant frequency related to the bit RPM colliding with the walls of the channel that it's cutting. The linear rails weren't as stiff as I thought. So I did some real sciencing, and I got out a micrometer and set up a test with a 1 meter piece of conduit and a 1 meter piece of linear rail and measured the deflections under 3 pounds of weight. And though I wasn't sure which direction the rail was deflecting, I confirmed that both ways were about the same stiffness and significantly less than the conduit. But I found there's an easy fix for that. Let's just attach a piece of 2020 aluminum extrusion. It significantly increased the stiffness in the straight loading direction way better than the conduit, and in the transverse loading direction it made it slightly better than the conduit. I'm not really sure which direction was the problem. I knew that at least I was getting a dramatic improvement. And I don't show it here, but I realized after I did these tests that I might as well just use 2040 aluminum, which should dramatically strengthen it in both directions. So I cut 2 pieces of 2040 extrusion I had left over from the enclosure. It is a little weird to have the rail be the fixed part of the structure and have the extrusion attached to that free floating, but I've been able to cut aluminum extremely well since then.
All right, so typical system, you have a lead screw nut and a lead screw. You attach your object to the nut and then the motor to the lead screw, and the motor will spin the lead screw and it will pull the object up and down, such as an extruder on a 3D printer or router on a CNC machine. But in order for this to move smoothly, there's space. The threads of the nut and the lead screw don't mesh perfectly, so there's a bit of play in there. You tell it to move just a little bit that way, but instead of actually moving, it just eats up that extra play in the system, and we call that backlash. So this is a design that Shane from Stuff Made Here recommended using 2 lead screw nuts, using these 3D printed parts as a spring, like a really, really stiff spring. So what we're going to do is we're going to put them together and we want to tighten them. So we're going to twist them into each other. And what that does is it creates a spring force. As they tighten to each other, these 2 faces are pushing against each other and it's pushing these nuts apart. And because of that, as it is, now I can't even spin them. There's just too much tension. And so here's the magic. What we want to do is release just a tiny bit of tension here, just enough so that the forces pushing against each other are still there, but just low enough that we can still barely spin the lead screw. Right now we can't spin it at all. It's too tight. So that's what these little slots are here for. We're going to put these screws in. And when you start, you want to put these in so loosely that they're not doing anything. So this is still too tight to spin the lead screw, but if we tighten these screws just ever so slightly, it's going to release just a tiny bit of that tension. So I like to do about a 1/4 turn at a time, do all 4, and then check. And I can spin it, but it's really tight. So I'm going to give it another 1/4 turn for each screw. There we go, that's moving smoothly now. And there you have it, that is 0 backlash.
By the way, this part that I showed off earlier is actually the exact same design, just cut in metal with the upgraded machine. I'd love to tell you how it works, but the machine is working great with the plastic one, so I didn't bother trying this one out. It turns out that's not the only source of backlash. You can see from this little clip that the anti-backlash thing we just installed actually is doing its job, but the spiral coupler that mates the motor to the lead screw is actually quite springy.
This is the coupler between the Z motor and the router. Even just by hand you can flex this spring. I can even stretch it. It doesn't take a lot of force, and that was causing some backlash. So I'm going to switch to this. As far as I can tell, they're very similar in what they do. It's just that this one's a lot stiffer. So we'll give it a shot.
Obviously, the key motivation here was to have the whole thing enclosed, especially if there's aluminum chips involved. I also wanted to be able to access the machine while it's running without compromising the way it contains the chips and the dust. That's why I designed the door with a horizontal hinge so I can fold it halfway down. And this allows me to reach in to turn the router on and off or poke in during a job with a vacuum or spray coolant. The bottom door is actually attached to the base via these flexible 3D printed TPU hinges. This is something I've wanted to try for a while, and this was a perfect low-risk opportunity to do it. TPU is a flexible rubbery filament that's super easy to print. The thick parts are pretty stiff, and the thin parts should survive hundreds or even thousands of bending cycles. If you're not familiar with TPU, one of my most popular videos on this channel was a deep dive video all about TPU. Got a link for you right here. I did it this way because I wanted to be able to accommodate oversized stock that sticks out the front of the machine or the sides of the machine. And doing that requires both a hinge that can completely clear the base, as well as no extrusion across the front, which explains why I designed the corners of the enclosure this way. With the underbase threaded inserts that you see in the build video, it's surprisingly strong with just these short pieces, and I save quite a bit of material cost not having to run extrusions around the full perimeter. If you look at the top corners of the enclosure, it looks like a pretty haphazard design of intersecting extrusions, but again, this was actually quite deliberate, because I wanted to take advantage of the natural channels of the extrusion for putting sliding panels on the sides and the back of the enclosure, because I wanted to make it easy to access the inside from any angle, either for maintenance or easier cleanup between jobs. So I needed the extrusions to come together in a way that the channels were clear for the panels, but also with enough contact I could add sufficient fasteners to make it super rigid. And finally, I wanted to replace the base of the machine with a thicker piece of MDF with all the anchoring points for the machine located precisely via CNC, and also grooves for installing T-tracks to use for workpiece holding with extra MDF spoil board pieces in between. The last major upgrade I want to talk about is the addition of the Raspberry Pi to start controlling the machine using something called CNC.js. I previously used the Jackpot CNC controller that I bought from V1 Engineering, which is itself impressively good value for a budget machine. It comes with 5 TMC 2209 motor drivers, which by itself is like $25, and it has an ESP32 microcontroller to host its own web-based user interface on your Wi-Fi network, and all of that is only $60. And it's also nice that it comes with firmware that's already configured for the MPCNC, like the dual end-stop squaring for X and Y, and all the motor and driver parameters pre-configured. It's a capable system, but it's pretty clunky, especially when it comes to macros and job setup. If this is your first CNC machine, it is a really nice way to get started quickly, but it's actually worth getting even if you want to use something else, because if you plug it into a separate computer using USB, you can bypass the whole Wi-Fi Fluid NC thing, and it can behave as a generic Gerbil controller, which is what most professional and industry standard CNC software uses, which includes CNC.js. I'm running CNC.js on the Raspberry Pi, which connects to the original Jackpot board over USB. It sends it G-code, and the original board just blindly converts those to electrical signals to run the motors and relay feedback to the host. With this setup, I connect to the Pi's CNC.js server instead of Fluid, and use their user interface instead, which is a much more complete battle-tested CNC control interface. First of all, you get keyboard jogging, which is a bigger luxury than it sounds. You can use the arrow keys on the keyboard to move the tool around, which really helps with job setup and probing and just generally moving things in and out of the way. Another main feature I love about CNC.js is the G-code preview. When you load a G-code file, it's a really nice way to confirm that you loaded the correct job, and you can confirm that the approximate scale of the operation is what you were expecting before you run it. And finally, macros. I don't know if I'm misunderstanding how to make macros in Fluid NC, but the only way I got it to work was to literally create a text file with the G-code you want, upload it to the SD card, and then create a button on the interface to link it to that file name. This is super tedious and really just a side effect of having such a minimal integrated user interface on the Jackpot board. However, with CNC.js, you have a rather elaborate system for setting commands and macros directly within the user interface. You can even select button sizes, put as much text as you want in the descriptions, and impressively, you can even use variables and equations in these macros. As an example, the aluminum XYZ plate you see me cut in the build video has a hole in it that's centered on the corner of the workpiece when you put it on the corner. And there's actually a cool math trick, which I'm not going to go into here. It allows you to find the center of that hole by probing 3 points within that hole, and the solution doesn't depend on the diameter of the hole or the diameter of the bit. If you're tempted to do this Raspberry Pi thing, I have to give you a heads up about a maddening problem you're going to have and how to fix it. So you're going to want the Raspberry Pi to be powered separately from the Jackpot board, because you don't want to power cycle the Pi on an emergency stop or just a general reset, because sudden shutdowns can corrupt the Pi, and even if it doesn't, it takes forever to reboot. But if you use a regular USB cable to connect the two, you're going to run into the problem that the Pi will be providing power to the Jackpot even when the power to that board is off. So the board never really shuts down, and it leads to a bunch of weird problems. After posting the V1 engineering forums, I figured out I needed to modify the USB cable. You have to take a small knife and cut off the insulation of the USB cable, and inside you're going to find 4 or 5 wires, and you have to cut the red one. It feels a little bit like defusing a bomb, but all you're doing is you're severing the power line between the Raspberry Pi and the jackpot, while still keeping the data lines that it uses for sending G-code. So that's it for this video. If you didn't watch the build time-lapse video, here's a link to it again. And if you're getting value out of these adventures in CNC machining and endless video editing, please consider hitting that like and subscribe button, and I'll be back soon again with more content. Thanks for watching.